On. Now before you cancel me or clutch your pearls, listen, I said stop being kind to everyone, not stop being kind at all. Because some of us, we're bleeding ourselves dry under the label of nice. Kindness without boundaries isn't kindness, it's self-betrayal. And you deserve better. You deserve peace, not performance. So let's talk about it. You know, most of us were taught that kindness is the highest virtue. Be nice, be agreeable. Be understanding. And you know what? That's not wrong. Kindness is powerful. It can heal, it can restore, it can break cycles. But somewhere along the line, we started confusing kindness with compliance. We started thinking that being kind meant saying yes to everything, never disagreeing, always being available, always being okay. And that's not kindness, that's self-erasure. See, true kindness has a backbone. It's not just soft, it's strong. It doesn't fold at the first sign of tension. But when you don't have boundaries, what you're calling kindness is often just fear in disguise. Fear of being disliked, fear of conflict, fear of losing your place in someone's life. So we put on a smile when we're hurting. We say sure, no problem, when inside we're screaming, I'm exhausted. We give people second chances and third chances, and 10th chances, not because they've earned it, but because we think being a good person means tolerating bad behavior. Let me tell you, it doesn't. Kindness without boundaries is not noble, it's not generous, it's not enlightened, it's actually dishonest, because when you constantly give without limits, you're not being honest about your capacity, your needs, or your worth. You're not showing up as your full self. You're showing up as a version of yourself you think other people will like more. And maybe they do like you more that way. But it's not real. They don't know the full you. They only know the agreeable version, the one who never pushes back, the one who always makes room for everyone else but leaves no room for themselves. Eventually that catches up with you. You start to resent people. You feel unseen. You burn out, and the worst part, you start to question if being kind is even worth it. It is, but only the kind of kindness that includes you too. Let me give you an example. If someone constantly interrupts you, talks over you, disrespects your time, and you continue to respond with a smile and say, okay. What are you teaching them? You're not teaching them how to treat you better. You're teaching them that their behavior has no consequences. That's not compassion. It's passivity, and it costs you. Real kindness says, I care about you, and I also care about me. It says, I'm not going to disrespect myself just to keep this interaction pleasant. It's the ability to say, hey, I'm not okay with how you spoke to me just now, and still remain calm, respectful, and grounded. That's what makes kindness powerful, when it's rooted in clarity, not guilt, when it comes from a place of self-respect, not self-sacrifice. It takes courage to be that kind, to look someone in the eye and set a boundary, not because you're angry, but because you're grounded in your worth. That's the kind of kindness the world needs more of, not performative niceness, not bending over backwards, not being liked by everyone in the room. But being someone who loves others without losing themselves in the process. So no, I'm not telling you to stop being kind. I'm saying stop calling it kindness when it's really avoidance, when it's really fear, when it's really a deep hope that if you're just good enough, people won't leave. You're already enough. And the people who truly care about you, they'll respect your no. They'll value your honesty. They'll appreciate that your kindness isn't hollow, it's real, it's whole, and it's grounded in truth. Because kindness without boundaries isn't kindness, it's self-abandonment dressed up in polite language. And you deserve better than that. There's this unspoken expectation a lot of us carry, that if someone is hurting, struggling, or in need, it's automatically our job to show up, to fix it, to absorb it, and that might sound noble on the surface. After all, we want to be good friends, good partners, good people. But here's the thing, not everyone deserves your emotional labor. That's a hard truth to sit with, especially if you're someone who's spent most of your life being the helper, the one who always listens, the one who always makes time, the one who keeps pouring even when your own cup is bone dry. But emotional labor, your time, your empathy, your presence, that's Zever work. And like any other kind of work, it deserves intention. It deserves discernment. Because what ends up happening when you don't protect your emotional bandwidth is this. You start giving it to people who don't value it. People who take and take and take but never ask how you're doing. People who treat your care like a free service, not a sacred offering. On. People who don't want to grow, they just want someone to lean on while they stay exactly where they are and listen. On. I'm not saying you shouldn't be there for others. I'm not saying you should cut everyone off the moment they go through something heavy. But I am saying if someone consistently makes you feel depleted, unheard, dismissed, or emotionally drained after every interaction, that's not a connection, that's a transaction, and you're the only one paying. There's a difference between supporting someone and being their emotional dumping ground, between empathy and enmeshment, between compassion and codependency. And if you've ever left a conversation more anxious than when you walked into it because someone vented at you for an hour straight without once asking how you were, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's okay to recognize that not everyone gets a front row seat to your heart. Not everyone earns your care just by showing up. Because your emotional labor is not a default setting. It's a gift, and you get to choose who receives it. Some people only reach out when they need something. You know those messages, hey, can I call you real quick? And you already know what's coming. It's not quick. It's not mutual. It's not respectful of your time or your boundaries. And we say yes anyway, not because we want to, but because we feel guilty saying no. Because we're afraid that if we don't show up, we're somehow failing them. Or worse, we'll be seen as selfish. But here's the truth. Protecting your energy isn't selfish, it's strategic. It's how you stay emotionally healthy. Because when you keep giving to people who don't give back, you start running on fumes. And eventually, resentment shows up. Quiet at first, just a little sigh when their name pops up on your phone. Then louder irritation, frustration, burnout. Until finally, you explode or shut down. And you wonder why you feel so disconnected from yourself. This is why boundaries matter. This is why you need to ask yourself, is this person invested in my well-being too? Or do they only come around when they need a refill? You can still love someone and limit your access to them. You can still care and say, I don't have the emotional capacity for this right now. You are not required to carry everyone. And anyone who makes you feel otherwise is not someone who respects the weight of what you give. You deserve reciprocity. You deserve space to breathe. You deserve relationships that don't leave you feeling drained and small and unseen. And most of all, you deserve to stop being the emotional janitor in other people's messes. Because your peace is not a public utility. It's a personal responsibility. Guard it like it matters. Because it does. There's a moment in life, maybe several, where you'll be standing in a room, or on a call or in a conversation, and you'll feel this quiet nudge inside. It's that uncomfortable feeling when someone crosses a line, when something feels off, when your gut says, this isn't right, and right behind that nudge comes the thought, but if I speak up, what will they think of me? That's the tension, the tug of war between self-respect and social approval. And most of us, if we're honest, have spent years, sometimes decades, letting approval win. We've said yes when we meant no, laughed along when we felt hurt, stayed quiet to keep the peace. We do it in meetings. We do it at dinners. We do it in friend groups, family rooms, group chats. And why? Because deep down we think that if people approve of us, if they like us, validate us, include us, then we're safe, then we matter. But here's the truth, the cost of that approval is often your integrity, and that's too expensive. Self-respect is not about being right all the time, it's not about ego, it's not about being above others. It's about honoring your voice, your values, and your worth, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's not the popular move, even when it makes the room go quiet. And that takes courage, because we've been conditioned to believe that likability is the prize, that if we just blend in enough, soften enough, agree enough, people won't leave. We water ourselves down just to avoid ripples. But every time you betray your own boundaries just to avoid friction, you teach yourself that other people's comfort matters more than your truth, and over time that chips away at you quietly but deeply. You start to question yourself, you lose clarity, you feel resentful, then guilty for feeling resentful. It's a cycle and it's exhausting. But the moment you start choosing self-respect over approval is the moment things begin to shift. It's when you learn to say, I hear what you're saying, but I'm not okay with that. It's when you decide that you'd rather stand alone in your truth than be celebrated in your silence. On, it's when you stop asking, do they like me? And start asking, do I like who I am when I'm with them? That question, do I like who I am when I'm with them? That's the one. That's your compass. On, because being respected doesn't always mean being liked. Some people won't like your boundaries. They won't like your confidence. Only on. They won't like that you're no longer bending over backwards to keep their approval. And that's okay. Their discomfort is not your responsibility. Only on. Your responsibility is to yourself, to wake up each day and look in the mirror and know that you didn't shrink for anyone. On. That you didn't trade your peace for applause. That you didn't let fear drive the wheel. When you live like that, when self-respect becomes your baseline, it changes everything. Your relationships deepen. Your decisions get clearer. On, you stop needing to prove yourself because you're no longer performing. You're just being authentically, unapologetically, fully. And yeah, on, you might lose a few people along the way, but you won't lose a you. And that's the one person you need to stay connected to, because approval fades. It's fragile. It shifts with trends and moods and opinions. But self-respect, that's rooted, that's steady. That's yours to keep. So no, don't let the fear of being misunderstood talk you out of standing tall. Don't let the pressure to fit in convince you to fold. On, you are not here to be tolerated. You're here to be true, because at the end of the day, only on. Sleeping well at night has a lot less to do with who clapped for you, and a lot more to do with whether or not you clapped for yourself. On. Some of us wear people pleasing like it's part of our DNA. We joke about it. We say things like, I just hate letting people down, or I'm the peacemaker, I keep things calm. And we convince ourselves that being endlessly agreeable is a strength. On, a virtue, even a personality trait. But let's be real, it's not. People pleasing is not a quirk. It's not your Enneagram type. It's not a love language. It's a trauma response. It's what happens when somewhere along the way you learn that your safety, emotional, physical, relational, depended on keeping everyone else happy. You weren't just being nice. You were surviving. You were scanning every room, every conversation, every facial expression, trying to manage other people's moods so you wouldn't be the target, or so you wouldn't be abandoned, or so you could feel needed. Useful, valuable, and you got good at it. So good, in fact, that now it feels automatic. Someone gets upset and without even thinking, you rush in to fix it. You apologize even when you've done nothing wrong. You laugh off things that hurt. You say yes, even though your whole body is screaming no. You learn that being yourself was risky, that disagreeing was dangerous, that setting boundaries might push people away. So instead, you adapted. You became who they needed you to be. You became likable, helpful, flexible at the cost of being real. And let's be clear, none of this makes you weak. It makes you human. Only you did what you had to do to protect yourself in environments that didn't always honor your voice. But just because that strategy worked then doesn't mean it's serving you of now, because here's what people pleasing does. It slowly erodes your identity. It makes you second guess your needs, your instincts, your value. It traps you in relationships where your worth is measured by how much you can give without asking for anything in return. It creates a life that looks good on the outside, helpful, dependable, selfless. But on the inside, you feel anxious, tired, empty. You can't build authentic connection on top of constant performance. You can't truly be known if you're always shifting to match what you think people want from you. You end up surrounded by people who like the version of you that's always agreeable, always accommodating, but they don't really know you. And deep down, you feel that. So here's what healing looks like. It's learning to sit with the discomfort of not being liked by everyone. It's letting people feel disappointed or upset without rushing to smooth things over. It's saying, no, I'm not okay with that, and standing in the silence that follows. It's realizing that conflict isn't always danger, and boundaries aren't rejection. It's unlearning the lie that your worth depends on your usefulness, because it doesn't. You don't owe people your constant availability. Only you don't have to explain every decision. You don't need to make yourself small so others feel big. You are allowed to disappoint people and still be a good person. You are allowed to rest. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to say, this doesn't work for me, without feeling guilty. And yeah, it will feel uncomfortable at first, when you've spent years finding your safety in approval. On, choosing yourself can feel like betrayal, but it's not. It's repair. It's you reconnecting with the parts of yourself you had to silence for too long. On, the people who love you, really love you, will adjust. The ones who were only there for what you gave them might fall away. But you, on, you'll be standing in your truth, not as someone who exists to please others, but as someone who's finally learned how to honor themselves. On, because you were never meant to live a life built entirely on other people's comfort. You were meant to live free. There's a small word that so many of us struggle to say out loud. It's not complicated. It's not fancy. It doesn't need an explanation. But for a lot of us, on, it feels like the hardest thing in the world to say without guilt. No, just that. Not no, but maybe later. Not no. I'm so sorry. On, I just not no unless you really need me. Just no. And if that word makes your chest tighten or your heart beat faster, you're not alone. On, most of us were raised to believe that saying no is selfish, that it's rude, that it means you're not a team player, not a good friend, not a loving person. Only on. So we try to soften it, we pad it with apologies. We over-explain. We feel like we have to earn the right to protect our own peace. But here's the truth. No is not cruel. No is not cold. No is not a rejection of someone's worth. No is a boundary. And boundaries are not walls. They're bridges, healthy, honest ones. They say, I care enough about this relationship to be real with you. On, to let you see what I can and cannot give. No is a full sentence, and it can be a loving one. When you say no from a grounded place, on, you're not pushing people away. You're simply making space for what's true. And truth makes relationships healthier, not weaker. On, because what's the alternative? Saying yes when you mean no, smiling through resentment, over-committing and then burning out, pulling away, on, or ghosting because you're too depleted to show up fully. That's not kindness. That's damage control, and it hurts everyone, especially you. Some people won't like your no, and that's okay. It's not your job to manage other people's feelings about your boundaries. On, it's your job to honor what's real for you. And the more you do that, the more you'll notice something. Your relationships start to shift. They become less about obligation and more about choice, less about performance and more about connection. You show up because you want to, not because you're afraid not to. And that changes everything. See, when you say yes to everything, you're actually saying no to yourself, no to your time, on, no to your energy, no to your peace. And when that becomes a pattern, you start disappearing from your own life. On, you look around and realize your calendar is full of commitments that don't reflect your values. On, your conversations are full of things you didn't really want to say. Your body feels tired, but your mouth keeps saying, sure, on, I can do that. That's not sustainable. That's a slow leak in your self-worth. But every time you say no, clearly, calmly, respectfully, you reinforce the message that your needs matter. On, too, that you are not here to be stretched to the edge of yourself just to make sure no one else feels uncomfortable. On, and sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone else is to tell them no. No, I can't loan you money. No, I can't make that event. No. On, I'm not available to talk right now. Because when you say no honestly, you're giving them the truth, and truth is a form of respect. On, people who are used to you overgiving may not like the shift. That's normal. They were benefiting from a version of you that said yes by default. On, but the people who truly care about you, the ones who want you to be whole and well, they will adjust. And if they don't, on, then maybe your no revealed something that was already true. You're not rejecting people when you say no. On, you're refusing to reject yourself. And that's not mean, that's mature. That's love in action. So if you need the reminder, here it is. On, you are allowed to say no. You don't need to apologize for it. You don't need to over-explain it. On, you just need to trust that your no has value, and that when you honor it, you're not pushing people away. You're finally standing beside yourself. On, kindness is powerful. It can shift a conversation, soften a hardened heart, and bridge gaps that logic never could. But what no one really talks about is where that kindness is coming from. Because if it's coming from the wrong place, if it's coming from guilt, fear, or some buried belief that you have to give it no matter what, it stops being kindness. It becomes self-neglect dressed in polite language. See, on, kindness should come from abundance, not obligation. It should be something you offer because you have the emotional space, the clarity, only on the desire to give freely, not because you're afraid of what might happen if you don't. There's a difference between a kind act and a kind habit. On a kind act is deliberate, grounded. It comes from presence. You hold the door because you want to. You listen to your friend because you care. On, not because you feel responsible for fixing them. You offer help because you have the capacity, not because saying no makes your stomach twist. On, but when kindness becomes a habit, especially when it's rooted in people pleasing, you don't even realize when you're crossing your own limits. You're complimenting people when you don't mean it. You're volunteering when you're exhausted. You're saying it's okay when it's not okay. On, and slowly, that habit hollows you out. It wears down your ability to be authentic, to be present, to be real. That's when you know it's no longer kindness. On, it's obligation. And obligation is not a foundation you can build peace on, because here's the truth: when you give out of depletion, on, you end up resenting the people you're trying to help. You smile, but your body feels tense. You say yes, but inside you're screaming for rest. On, and when you give like that for long enough, kindness starts to feel like a trap, like something you're, say, expected to do, not something you want to do. And that's not fair to you or to the people on the receiving end. You see, real kindness doesn't require you to sacrifice your well-being. On, real kindness has boundaries. It's thoughtful, not automatic. It knows the difference between being generous and being a martyr. Only on, you can't give what you don't have. And when you try to pour from an empty cup, you don't just end up dry, you end up bitter. You start snapping at people. On, you feel underappreciated, you feel invisible. And then, when someone finally does show you care, you don't even know how to receive it. On, because you've trained yourself to only give. But you were never meant to live that way. Kindness isn't a performance. It's not a strategy to be liked. On, it's not a tool to keep the peace. It's an overflow, a byproduct of being grounded in who you are and what you need. On, when you treat yourself with compassion, when you take care of your body, protect your peace, honor your limits, you become the kind of person who can give without losing themselves in the process. And that version of kindness, that version changes lives. On, because it's not manipulative. It's not anxious. It doesn't ask, will they still like me if I say no? It just says, I care. On, and I have something to give, and if I don't right now, that's okay too. And you are not required to set yourself on fire to keep other people warm. On, you are not less kind for saying, I need a minute. You're not selfish for saying, not today. In fact, on, that might be the kindest thing you do for yourself and for everyone around you. When you give from abundance, your kindness has integrity. It has weight. It's not a reflex, it's a choice. And people feel the difference. They can tell when you're giving them your overflow instead of draining yourself dry. On, so let's stop glorifying kindness that comes at the cost of your own well-being. Let's stop calling burnout being a good person. The world doesn't need more exhausted, resentful givers. On, it needs people who are full enough to be kind without losing themselves. So here's where it all lands. Stop being kind to everyone, not because kindness is wrong, but because you matter too. Your time, your peace, your emotional energy, they're not unlimited. On, and if you give it all away without discernment, without boundaries, you don't just lose balance, you lose yourself. Kindness without clarity becomes self-erasure.